Hello there, my name is Nancy Shore, and I am the Strategic Partnership and Volunteer Coordinator for Ann Arbor Public Schools. I want to welcome you to your volunteer journey here with us at Ann Arbor Public Schools with this orientation video. This orientation is going to provide you with some information, some skill building, some logistics to prepare you for your placement with Ann Arbor Public Schools. I ask that you get some sort of thing to record information on as you're listening to and watching this video, either a document on your computer or your phone, or a piece of paper and a pen or pencil, because we are going to have times where you can take notes, where you can reflect, and hopefully that'll help you retain the information. And then you can go and take your orientation quiz so that you can finish this component of your onboarding as a volunteer at Ann Arbor Public Schools. Okay, so let's start. So once again, we are excited to have you here for our orientation, and we are going to get the show started. So what are we going to talk about today? First, we are going to discuss the information about Ann Arbor Public Schools, go over some of our COVID protocols, talk about your role as a volunteer with Ann Arbor Public Schools, give you some information on recognizing and reporting abuse, talking about how you can be set up for success with your Ann Arbor Public Schools contact. We're going to give you some logistics to prepare for your placement, give you a couple of student behavior strategies, and then send you out the door with some next steps and resources so that you can be prepared for whatever comes next. So first of all, a little bit about Ann Arbor Public Schools for those of you who have never participated or volunteered with us before. First of all, who am I? My name is Nancy Shore, and as I said, I am the Strategic Partnership and Volunteer Coordinator for Ann Arbor Public Schools. My role as part of Ann Arbor Public Schools is to steward and shepherd all of our lovely volunteers into our schools. And we also have a lovely work study student who is helping me out. Her name is Ashley Stressler, and she is here to ensure that you have a great experience at Ann Arbor Public Schools. You may get emails from her, and she will really help you along the way. So a little bit now about Ann Arbor Public Schools. So we are relatively large. We're about 18,000 students. And of those students, we do have students that experience special needs. We do have students that are from homes impacted by poverty. And we also have many schools where there are students that are speaking languages other than English. And so chances are you're going to be in a classroom with 20 or 30 students, and you're going to have a student in all of these different categories. So this is the first chance for you to think and reflect. As you look at this information, what jumps out at you? What surprises you? And what do these stats say about Ann Arbor Public Schools? So just take a second to think about that. Well, as you look at this information, some of the things that you may be thinking about are that we actually have a fair amount of economic diversity in our schools. And depending on what school you're at, there's going to be more school students from poverty, or you're going to have more students that are of different ethnicities and races. You're going to have students that are speaking different languages, because we do have in our community, we do have some economic segregation. So it's really going to depend on your school, but chances are in any classroom you're in, you're going to see a little bit of all of these roles. And so it's just an interesting thing to think about, that our schools are very heterogeneous, and there's going to be all kinds of students in the classrooms. And so that also means that they're going to come in with all different needs, all different cultures, all different perspectives. So keep that in mind as you work with our students. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Ann Arbor Public Schools, you can go to our main website, a2schools.org. There is a page for every school, so you can find more information about your schools. You can check out our social media pages. We are doing a lot on Twitter, especially, also on Facebook. And so that's a great way to keep updated and informed. And because it is the winter, there may be some snow days happening at Ann Arbor Public Schools. And so if that is the case, we will always put that information on our social media pages, on our website, and we do have a hotline that you can call if you want that information as well. So let's now reflect back on some of the key takeaways that you can have when you think about Ann Arbor Public Schools. So first of all, the diversity of our students is going to shape some of the experiences that you have as a volunteer. Lots of economic diversity. So you may see a student in a classroom whose parent is a surgeon at Michigan Medicine. You may see a student in a classroom whose parent is doing some janitorial work at Michigan Medicine. So that's going to impact the different types of students that we're going to have and some of the different experiences they may be bringing when they're coming to our schools. We also do have many students with disabilities, several thousand students, maybe 2,000, 3,000 students that have disabilities. And our English language learner population is growing. We do have some refugees from Afghanistan in our community. We do have many students that speak Spanish and Chinese. So you're going to see many of those students in the classrooms. If you want to know about snow days, we've got our website, we've got social media pages, and always you can contact if you don't have your information for your AAPS contact or you need to get further assistance, you can always email that partners@a2schools.org email and we will help you out. So we've talked a little bit about Ann Arbor Public Schools. Now we are going to go into some of the COVID protocols that you're probably very familiar with by now. So what are they? First, as all of you know, when you're completing our volunteer information form, you will need to show proof of vaccination in order to volunteer at Ann Arbor Public Schools. We also ask that when you're in our schools and in our buildings, you will need to wear a mask at all times. We do have a symptom pre-screening that you would want to do just like if you are a University of Michigan student. There is that Response a Blue app. This is very similar. There is a pre-screening that you can do that asks about symptoms and ensure that if you're feeling sick, you're not coming in. And we also always ask that if you feel sick, if you have a fever, if you have a cough, just don't volunteer on that day. And then finally, there may be a chance that even if you are fully vaccinated, you will test positive for COVID. And we want to make sure that you contact us immediately because it will help us ensure that students in our schools are safe. So further information about the positive COVID test. So if you are someone that has a positive COVID test, we are going to want you to let us know so that we can see if there have been any close contacts you have had in Ann Arbor Public Schools, so we can also notify those individuals. If you end up being in a classroom with somebody who has tested positive, you would also be notified and we'd make sure to do that. It's all anonymous, so nobody's going to know who tested positive, just that you may have been exposed to somebody who tested positive. We do still have some quarantine guidelines now that there is a vaccine available to 5 to 11-year-olds. Some of it changes. So if you are vaccinated, we do not need you to quarantine. We will not need students to quarantine, but there is a testing protocol. And so you will have to get tested and ensure that you have a negative COVID test before you can come back. Anybody who is unvaccinated does have to still do a quarantine. And so there's more information you can get from this slide later if you want more information about that. And finally, we do want to have every volunteer be aware that there may be a time when there's too many people, either our volunteers or students that are getting COVID, and we may need to close. And so if that happens, then we will let you know and make sure that you are aware of if there's a timeline to return. All of this is to say, please continue to exhibit positive behaviors so that you don't get positive, right? So things like keeping your distance, trying to avoid large gatherings, wearing your mask at all times, getting tested if you can. So these are all things that can continue to help us. And what's great is that we continue to have more technology, more access to things. So continue to try to do practices and behaviors that will allow us to continue our schooling and allow you to continue to volunteer if you are volunteering in person. I should also preface this by saying some of you may be doing virtual volunteering. If so, obviously you don't need to worry about our COVID protocols, but for your own health, you probably should still pay attention to them. So what are our key takeaways when we think about COVID protocols? Of course, if you are in our buildings, mask up. If you are feeling sick and you're volunteering in person, please just don't come, but make sure to let your volunteer contact or AAPS contact know. And of course, if you test positive, let us know right away so that we can make sure to ensure that nobody in our schools may be a close contact, or if they are, that we can follow up as necessary. So we have talked about Ann Arbor Public Schools. We have gone over the wonderful COVID protocols, and now we're going to get into your role as a volunteer at Ann Arbor Public Schools. So here again, I'd like you to reflect for a second. So A lot of studies show that having just one positive adult role model in the life of a child can really help them academically. And you could be that positive adult role model. That is the beauty of having volunteers and extra adults in our schools. So what I want you to do is reflect for a second on what it means to you to be a positive adult role model. So some things that may come into mind as you're thinking about being a positive adult role model may be being honest, listening, caring, being that coach. Those are all really good qualities. And as you're volunteering in AAPS, that's really what we want you to think about is how can I be the best positive role model, the best inspiration to the students that I'm working with? How can I behave in that way? A couple of things that you can do. Your first and foremost goal at Ann Arbor Public Schools is to get to know the students that you're working with. Yes, you may be offering tutoring, you may be offering English language support, but if you don't know those students, none of that's going to matter. So really focus on how you're going to get to know them. Make sure you understand and start asking about interests. Connect to them on what are some of the needs that they may have. What culture is that student coming from? And also, of course, their strengths. And then finally, making sure that you understand names. You may need to understand a pronoun if a student maybe wants to be they instead of a he or a she. And then something else to think about as you get to know our students is part of getting to know students is understanding your identities and how that might shape how you perceive of students when you're coming into our schools. So if you are white and you are working with a student of color, think about some of the different practices that you may have that may be different from the students that you're working with because of the experiences that they've had. Think about your age and how that may change how you interact with students, and recognize that every student in our schools, they want to learn, they want to be successful. And so as you're working with them, getting to know them as they're themselves and all the things that they bring is really going to help. And part of that is also understanding what you're bringing into your experience. So keep that in mind. So we think about what are some ways you can get to know students. I know many of you have worked with young people or students in the past, so you can think about what are those things that have really helped you, asking about interests, maybe playing icebreaker games, sharing some things about yourself. There's lots of things you can do. On the flip side, what does it mean to not be a positive role model? One of the things that is also important to consider is that while AAPS students are somebody that you want to connect with, somebody that you want to inspire, they're not really your friends. And the reason I say that is because it's a little bit different to have a relationship with somebody as a friend than it is as a positive adult role model. So what are some things that you may not want to do? You do not want to share your personal information, where you live, your phone number, your social media contacts, because that draws that line and makes it a little fuzzier about who you are and what your role is. So think more like a camp counselor, like a coach, and less like I'm your best friend or I'm going to be your pal. Simply because that makes it a little unclear about the boundaries that you want to set, and you really want to be clear with those boundaries. So as a positive adult role model, another thing to keep in mind as you're thinking about working with our students is that every student is protected by federal privacy laws. And so you really need to respect student privacy. So what does that mean? That means that students are going to tell you all kinds of personal information about themselves. You may learn about their birthday, what's going on in their home life, whether they have a disability that is affecting them at school, if they're undocumented. You might hear all kinds of things, and that's okay because that's part of connecting with that student. But then you need to make sure that that information is not shared outside of the school setting. If you are in a class, you're not sharing that information in terms of actual names or identifiable information about students in your assignments. You're not sharing information with your somebody that you live with or your friends. You're keeping that to help that student as you're working with them. And a big reason is because they can't consent to you sharing information about them. So really be clear that you want to hear this information, but you're not going to share it outside of the school setting. That also includes photos. That also includes any other personal information. And in addition to not sharing the personal and private information of students outside of schools, we also ask for your protection and for the protection of our students, that you are not alone with students at any time. So this is really because if something were to happen between you and a student, so let's say you go into a room and it's just you and the student and you close the door, and then something were to happen and the only witnesses are you and that student, we don't want to put you in that situation. So it's really important that you make sure that you're always in a place where there's 3 people, or you're in a hallway where you're very visible. So you still want to have that one-on-one time. It's fine to have one-on-one time with the student, as long as you're in a space where you can be observed and you can be supervised. And when in doubt, ask. Maybe that doesn't make the best acronym, right? But we're thinking about, when in doubt, think about what would a positive adult role model do? So if it doesn't feel right, let's say maybe you're somebody who likes to drop a lot of cuss words, a lot of F-bombs. Maybe you like to tell dirty jokes to your friends. Maybe your behavior can be a little bit risky. Think about, is this gonna demonstrate positive adult role model status to this particular child that I'm working with? And if not, don't do it. So let's talk about those key takeaways thinking about your role at Ann Arbor Public Schools. So as we said, so important to connect first. Your number one goal is to get to know the students that you're working with. You really want to make sure that you're respecting student privacy, so you're not sharing information, personal information about students, their educational status, their home life status outside of the school. And of course, you are not alone with students. So you're always in situations where you can be observed by somebody, so that if nothing will happen, that could be disconcerting between you and that student. Okay, so we've gone over AAPS, COVID, your role, and now we're going to get into something that hopefully none of you ever have to encounter, but I want to make sure that we touch on, which is, how do you recognize and report abuse if you see it? So first of all, the general definition of child abuse, and this is from the state of Michigan, we are talking about some sort of harm or threat that is happening that is not accidental. It's to a child, and it is somebody that the child is related to, or is a legal guardian, somebody who's responsible for the child. So the reason that it's important for you to know this is because if you connect to a student in a certain way, they may reveal something to you. They may tell you something that is happening to them. And I want you to be prepared to feel comfortable reporting that, because we want you to be able to report things if you notice something that is concerning you about a child. So knowing some of the signs of child abuse. So first of all, we have physical abuse. So those are things like bruises and burns that you may notice. Mental abuse, so any sort of repeated patterns of children being belittled, emotional injury. Sexual abuse, so seeing strange markings on a child, or hearing a child talk about something that might have happened to them of a sexual nature that was not appropriate. And then just general neglect and maltreatment, so students that are clearly not being cared for in an extreme way. And you can get lots more information should you want to, looking at the slideshow from the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and also going more into those potential indicators. But it is a lot of things that if you saw it, you probably would feel like, I'm a little concerned about this. So what are things that you wouldn't want to be concerned about? Well, children get all kinds of weird things going on, like head lice. If there's something that maybe a child caught, that's not a reason to report anything. Any educational concerns. So a child having problems learning at school, that's not necessarily seen as abuse. Things that are happening to a child because of poverty, feeling trauma, experiencing or talking about trauma. Those are things that you want to be worried about and thinking about, but that's not a reason to report child abuse. And then finally, Unfortunately, we do have many siblings that's bad. I have 2 kids at home and they like to get into ruffles and fights all the time, but that's not necessarily a reason to talk about child abuse. So just understanding that there's things that are defined as child abuse and things that are just unfortunate or unpleasant, but we would not call them child abuse. So what about if you notice some of those red flags for child abuse? We want you, and this is our policy at Ann Arbor Public Schools, to initially tell your AAPS contact. That would be the primary thing we want to do, because you're not necessarily spending enough time with that child to really know what's going on. We want to make sure that somebody who might have more familiarity is able to do something about it. And since all of our staff are mandated reporters, once you tell them, they are mandated to report. If for some reason you don't feel comfortable telling your contact, or you feel like they're not responding in a way that is going to help that student, you can absolutely report the incident yourself. And there's a link on this site that goes right to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services reporting form. It is something that you can do, but just know that it needs to be a real report. Something that you really feel like is happening. Know that it's also going to be confidential. And then, speaking of confidential, anything that you hear, make sure you're keeping it confidential from others. You're not putting it on social media. You're not calling the police, simply because we don't necessarily know what's happening and we want to make sure to report it, but we don't want to spread it around to other people. So what are some key takeaways that we can have from recognizing and reporting abuse? So we're going to want to know those signs and see if we can see any of those physical, mental, sexual, maltreatment, or abuse signs. If we do, we want to make sure that you say something, either tell your AAPS contact. If that doesn't seem to work, you can report it, and keep that confidential. Your report will be made confidential, and we want to make sure that what you say to any of your contacts is not spread outside of just the people that need to know. Okay, great. So we have done half of our orientation. We are going to keep you going, and we're going to talk about how, when you get introduced to your Ann Arbor Public Schools contact, it can be as successful as possible. So first, one of the things you really need to keep in mind is that you are going to need to jump right in when you get into our schools, when you start thinking about volunteering, when you get your placement. And what does it mean to jump in? It means be proactive, do the research. When you're in that classroom, figure out what you're going to do on that first day, because the teacher is relying on you to be a volunteer who wants to help, who wants to get ready. And so whatever you can do, if you're a more timid person or you're just not quite sure what you want to do what you can ahead of time to talk to your AAPS contact, to meet, to talk to a coordinator or professor of a program if you have one, to say, what can I do to feel most confident so that on my first day, I am ready to go. And as we're thinking about our AAPS contact and wanting to make sure that you are set up for success, I want you to think about, what is the biggest challenge that AAPS staff may have with some of the volunteers? So take a second and think about what that might be. Well, if you said communication, you're right. So unfortunately, we have a lot of people who things happen. So COVID maybe happens, or you get really busy with your work life or your school life, and you might forget to follow up. We really encourage you to communicate, over communicate, make sure that your contact knows what's going on with you. It may be that that contact is not being communicative. And again, your role is to continue to ask, to push, to make sure that you are initiating and being responsible for that communication. We don't want you to move to the Darth Vader side of communication. We want you to be that communication Jedi. We want you to really think about, what can I do to make sure that that staff person knows that I am a responsible adult, I am paying attention to my schedule, I am letting that person know if I need to take a break for whatever reason. And so one really great tool that we're giving you in order to make this easier is this volunteer educator agreement. So this is a Google form that you can use with your AAPS contact to establish all of the expectations that you guys have right at the beginning of your volunteer experience, which will help set you up for success later on. So how can you set yourself up? Here are some key takeaways to help you and your AAPS contact be as successful as possible. So first of all, you have a responsibility to be proactive. Jump right in, make sure that you're asking questions, you're doing research, anything you can so that when you get there, you are ready to go. Really be clear in your communication with your AAPS contact if you're not going to be able to be there, if you're having any sort of issues with your placement. Be upfront with that contact to make sure that they know. And all of this is really made easier by this agreement that we've created. This is a document that you can complete. You can do it on a computer, you can do it on your phone. And when you complete that, it's going to email the final document with all the responses to you and your AAPS contact so that you have that information at your fingertips and understand your expectations and your role as an AAPS volunteer. So we've set you up for success with your placement. And now we're going to talk a little bit about some logistics as you work. And this is, of course, for those of you who are volunteering in person. If you are volunteering virtually, you will want to make sure to talk to your AAPS contact about if there's anything that you need to do to get ready ahead of time. So what about if you're volunteering in person? How do you prepare? First of all, anybody can do this. We've got a volunteer guide. You want to do your research. This is continuing to be that proactive stance that you're going to want to take as a volunteer. You are going to have that time to meet with your AAPS contact. You want to schedule a meeting with them. You want to have a time to talk with them, hopefully before you start. You've got that volunteer teacher agreement that you and that AAPS contact can complete together, either during that initial meeting, the get to know you meeting, or you can complete it when you meet for the first time. And then really think about your responsibilities. You are responsible for communicating, for sharing your schedule, for talking about issues. This is really, we're putting it on you simply because you have the ability to do all these things. We're giving you some tools that it'll make it easier for you to be able to initiate and be effective at working with your AAPS contact. So what do you want to do on your first day? Well, of course, you want to show up early. And the reason is this may be the first time you've ever been to this building. It's not always easy to figure out where to go. And all of our doors are locked during normal business hours. So it may take you a second to buzz in. Then once you do, you're going to need to go to the main entrance. And when you get there, there's typically a visitor check-in procedure. So there may be a visitor badge you're going to get. You might need to sign in. So all of those things, make sure that you do that ahead of time. And then what else do you want to do to prepare for your placement? Here are the key takeaways from the information I just shared. So we've got that volunteer guide. If you don't want to read the whole thing, you can at least just know some of the topics that are in it to make you ready to go. You want to have that agreement between you and that volunteer in that contact so that you guys are on the same page. And then just be ready on your first day. Know where your placement is, know how you're going to get there, any sort of logistics that the teacher needs you to work on with them. Make sure you talk about that ahead of time. Okay, so we're going to now give you one last piece of advice, which is just a couple of strategies that you can have in your back pocket as you start encountering students if you've never worked with them before, or just refreshing some information that you may already know. So what are some strategies? First thing to think about is when you are working with any person, people have all kinds of needs that they need to be filled all the time, right? We have all kinds of needs. What are some things that we have that we need? Well, we all need to feel safe. We need to feel happy, understood. We need to have some of these things. Everybody wants to belong. So these are all needs that our students are going to be having as you're working with them. So what happens when we don't get some of these needs met? Well, if you don't feel successful in school, how do you think you're going to act? If you don't speak English as your first language and you're struggling to communicate, how understood do you think you're going to feel, and how's that going to impact your behavior? So this is really to say that as you're working with our students, really think about and hone in on what need might this person have, And how can I speak to that need versus just making an assumption that this child is misbehaving or is a bad kid or doesn't want to care or work. Every student that we have wants to learn. There just might be some barriers or to reasons that they are not. And it may not be all their own fault. They might not feel safe because they're experiencing homelessness that has nothing to do with them. And so thinking about and understanding what those needs are can really help you work with them better. You may also encounter, as you're working with our students, a bunch of big emotions: frustration, anger, screaming, yelling. So what do you do if that happens? So first and foremost, stay calm. If you are regulated and you're calm, that's really going to help. That's a great positive adult role model move. Letting that student cool down. So not always trying to fix the problem immediately. Not shaming a student in public. So we don't want to call anybody out. Again, we don't know what's happening in their lives. So we don't want to assume that they're behaving in a certain way because of why we think that they are. It could be totally different. And then let's continue to help validate emotions. We want students to be okay feeling their emotions, but how can we help them address those emotions in ways that are productive rather than detrimental or destructive? So last bit of advice is, as you're working with students, it's really helpful to think about the kind of language that you can use that will help set those students up for success. We have a whole curriculum that we've given our teachers called Responsive Classroom. And part of that is some language that they can use. And so this is another really good tool for your toolbox as you're working with our students. So the first kind of language is reinforcing language. And this language is something that helps you if you want to really help build on the strengths of a student. Maybe they've been struggling with an assignment and now they got it finally after they worked on a couple different strategies. You want to really make sure that they know that, and you want to be as concrete as possible so that they know, wow, I saw that you were really struggling, but then you tried that other strategy to figure out the solution. How did that work for you? Or how did you think about that? So then that engages the student in reflection, in thinking about what they're doing well. So there's lots of things you can do. We also are not going to be holding up students as examples for other students. Look at how great Glenda did on her exam. How come nobody else did it that well? Because again, we don't know where students are at in their lives. And so we want to really build on the strengths of each individual student and support them. So you can see some prompts on this slide. These are things that you can practice as you think about helping students and praising them. Next is that reminding language. So many students, if you're working with them, maybe they've just been told the tasks they need to do. They need to put their shoes on to get ready for recess. They need to turn their books to page 5 and start working on the assignment. And maybe they decided not to do that thing all of a sudden for whatever reason, they got distracted. We first and foremost want to believe that students can and do remember for themselves. So what can you do to help that student remember? You can ask them things like, what are you supposed to be doing right now? What will it look like when we're ready to go? What's your job right now? All of these will help refocus that student and help them remember for themselves, because that's the key goal. The goal is not for you to continue and constantly remind them, right? And then finally is redirecting language. So this is language that is going to help if students are really off track, not paying attention. You've tried that reminding language and it's just not working. This is a time to be as direct and specific as possible. You might need a consequence. If you don't put your shoes on, we can't go outside. Making sure that it's very clear that what needs to happen. It's time to be quiet, put your book down, get your assignment out now. And this is not something that's being mean. It's just making sure that a student knows what they need to do. So this is really important and effective language that you can do if you're working with the student and you need to make sure that they are really paying attention and focusing on what they need to do next. So what are some key behavior takeaways that you can have from student behavior? First of all, really think about student needs. So what need does that student have? And how can you help as the volunteer fulfill that need? Help them feel like they belong, help them feel safe, help them feel successful. Those are some ways that you can best work with students. Being calm, that is one of those very important positive adult role model moves. The calmer you can be, the easier and more well-regulated the students will be able to be in your presence. So what can you do to keep yourself calm? What are some strategies you can have so that when a student does trigger you or ruffle your feathers, you're able to respond with calm kindness? And then finally, practice using some different strategies for the words that you're going to use, your reminding language, your redirecting language, your reinforcing language. Those languages will help you as you work with our students. And you can see the link on this slide. When you look at these slides, they are in the volunteer guide, and it will help you practice some of these different types of phrases that you can use. So we are now about to send you off into your next steps for you as a volunteer. So what are some of those next steps? So in terms of your placement timeline, so you'll need to complete your volunteer form if you haven't already. I'm sure many of you already have since you're listening to this video. Make sure that you have emailed us your vaccine information if you have not included a link in the volunteer form. You are then we're going to be looking at all your information. We're going to clear you. We will let you know. No news is good news. So if you don't hear anything, you've been cleared. And now we're going to be looking for a placement for you. You've told us what you're interested in, and we're hoping that you will get placed within 2 to 4 weeks of completing that form. And we will let you know either if you have been placed by introducing you to your contact. If we have not found a placement for you, we will let you know that as well if there's some reason that we can't place you. After you get placed, you will receive an email introduction between you and your AAPS contact. This is our handoff for you in that AAPS contact to now make your plans and arrangements, schedule your first day, figure out if you needed to have some continue to have conversation to make sure this is a good fit for both of you. So that is where we send you flying off into your school, working with your AAPS contact. And then after you get that introduction, we want you to jump right in, be proactive, and reach out to your contact, work out the details of your volunteering, anything else that you might want to do to make sure it's a good placement. And then of course, we have this wonderful agreement that you and that person can complete either during an initial meeting or later. And as I said, our goal is we're going to try to get everybody placed, especially if you're in a U of M course, very early on in January, mid-January. And our goal is to get everybody placed by February. And so that is the goal. So with that, make sure that you check out the checklist that you received when you got the email after you took our volunteer form information. You filled out the form. We also have it on our volunteers website. It's just got the 3 steps you need to complete in order to volunteer with AAPS. We've got that great volunteer guide, so make sure to look it over. And then when you have your email introduction to your AAPS contact, you want to be introduced and you want to complete your agreement. So with that, it is time for you to be done with this video. So once we're done with this video, your next step is to now look at the quiz questions, answer them while everything is fresh in your mind. You must get 50% correct in order to pass. If you don't, you can always take the quiz again and continue on your way. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today and for listening to this orientation. I hope that it's given you some information that you can use right away. And of course, if you have any questions about anything that you've just listened to, you are free to contact us at partners@AnnArborPublicSchools.org. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.